this guy is frankly terrible. As you can probably tell from at least that video, he's a sexist, and he just came out with a movie called Am I a Racist? And the answer is yes, of course. But here we go. We're gonna. I apologize, guys. We're gonna go ahead and suffer through the trailer. Now, there's one final thing I'd like to go over. I haven't seen this yet, but we're actually gonna look at some breaking points. I've gone over breaking points before. It is a channel I am so disappointed in. So it started out with Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball. And I was a pretty big fan of Crystal Ball back a while ago. But they did a show called Rising on the Hill. And it's called Rising, and it was on the Hill YouTube channel. And I thought that was decent. I thought they did a decent job breaking down Sagar and Jetty. He was the right wing voice, and Crystal Ball's left wing voice. And Sagar always felt like he felt like a palatable right winger. It's weird. And then what happened was they end up breaking away and doing their own show called Breaking Points. Now, I was a fan of Breaking Points for a little while, and then it became clear that Sagar was able to use the Breaking Points platform to get more extreme in his rhetoric, much more extreme in his rhetoric. And that was very, very cringe. And Crystal was clearly not equipped to handle it. And it was very disappointing because you just have Sagar saying this insane fucking shit, absolutely insane shit, and Crystal going, just not having any way to push back on it at all. But anyways, so while I guess Crystal and Sagar are off, they had Ryan and Emily on, and they interviewed Matt Walsh. And let's see how this goes, because I haven't seen this yet, but I am interested.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, now the movie's doing pretty well. One of the, I don't know if it was a coincidence or fate, whatever it was, as it happened, when your movie was released last week, everyone was debating whether a very particular post on social media was racist. So we thought we would play a little game of, was it racist? With Laura Loomer's infamous curry tweet. If Kamala Harris wins, the White House will smell like curry, and White House speeches will be facilitated via a call center.
Yeah, it's super racist. That's, what the fuck? Dude, even Marjorie Taylor Greene called this racist. You know how racist you gotta be for Marjorie Taylor Greene to call you racist?
American people will only be able to convey their feedback through a customer satisfaction survey at the end of the call that nobody will understand. One of the interesting things about your movie, which I really enjoyed, Ryan might have something to add on that, we might disagree on it, I really enjoyed it, is getting to the bottom of the the industrial complex that's been built up around race relations that often will advance this silly, incoherent, elite definition that used to be prolific in academia and then leaked out into the rest of the world. So by the sort of definition of racism that you're challenging in this film, is that Laura Loomer tweet racist? And then by the kind of definition that you're trying to promote of racism, which maybe you have a way to explain it, I would define, I don't want to put words in your mouth, as just sort of like genuine discrimination based on this belief that people of a different race are somehow inferior.
Yeah.
Is this post-racist?
I mean, by the definition advanced by the DEI industry, it certainly would count as racist.
Right.
I wouldn't call it racist. I think it's just kind of a dumb joke. Mm-hmm. Not very helpful joke. And also, by the way, I like Indian food. So I think when things smell like curry, I'm a huge fan of curry personally. So I don't see that as an insult. But look, someone engaging in stereotypes, it might be insensitive, it might be unhelpful politically, but it's not necessarily racist. In fact, I would say it's often not racist because to me, what racism means is that you hate people of another race and or you think they're inferior to you in some way.
Yes. So real quick. So he's doing what lots of times these people do, changing the goalpost. They like to change the goalpost on what racism actually means. Racism is just exhibiting certain behaviors that indicate that essentially you look down on, or certain or people should be looked down on for their race. It's that simple.
way, inherently because of their, immutable characteristics. So that's racism. And as long as you don't feel that way about another race of people, then you're not racist. You might have stereotypical views.
No, racism's behavior. Racism, like, they like to act like, oh, being a racist is like being like a dark part in your soul. No, it's not. It's just a set of behaviors. It's a set of behaviors. We're all capable of being racist, and we should try not to be.
Views about another group of people. Everybody does. But it's not automatically racist if you don't also harbor that ill will towards them. And as far as whether or not, so the real answer is that
Matt, we cannot dive into people's souls, and that's why they like to change the goalposts to like, oh, it has to be like a deep-seated hatred in your soul. We can't actually figure that shit out. We judge people by their actions, not by their deep-seated soul.
with the Laura Loomer tweet, I wouldn't say that it's racist. The only person who can answer whether it's racist is her. We'd have to ask her, well, do you hate people of Indian descent? Do you think that they're inferior to you in some way?
It's a useless fucking definition.
If the answer is yes, then yeah, that's racist. But she'd probably say no. And if she said no, then I'll have to take her word for it. She's the only one who can speak to her own, what's going on in her own mind. And
yeah, using this definition he just gave us, racism is useless. Like, it's a useless fucking term that you can't apply to anybody because nobody's going to say they're racist. You could ask David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the KKK, hey, are you racist? And he'll be like, no. I'm sure he'll give you economic excuses why, he does what he does. But yes, the Grand Wizard of the KKK is racist.
in her own heart.
Although she's a Trump supporter, she wants Kamala to lose. Presumably, she's making the point in a negative way,
Well,
right?
it's
Like,
also-
this is a bad thing.
that's
like
kind
call
of-
center and like she's saying these are all bad things.
Well, this
right?
is an interesting point about
So that
stereotyping.
would, by your definition, make it.
Because stereotyping is often leveraged to say that there's something negative that is
Yeah.
generally attributed to someone of a different race.
Right, it's correct. It's negative. She means it in a negative way. Because we can assume that she thinks things smelling like curry is a bad thing. I guess not a fan of Indian food. But you can believe or engage in or repeat negative stereotypes and not be racist. You might just happen to think. So, for example, I'll give another example. Somebody might say, Asians are bad drivers. I don't know if that's actually true statistically. I'm not sure. But if you happen to believe that
Okay, that's a massive stereotype right there.
it's true, does that mean that you hate Asians? No, it just means that you think that Asians by
No, it doesn't mean you hate Asians, but it does mean you have a racial stereotype, a racist stereotype.
and large are bad drivers. It doesn't mean you hate them. It doesn't mean that you're racist against them.
Although it could mean that you think there's like an intellectual inferiority, or it could mean you think there's a cultural reason that they're bad at driving in Western countries.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, and no one thinks that Asians are intellectually inferior. I think everybody understands that that's one of the other, because stereotypes can be positive too. Another stereotype is that they're very good at math and science and that sort of thing. So, there are generalizations you can make about groups of people that can be largely true. And, I'm not sure I've ever heard a stereotype where I thought to myself, well, that bears no resemblance to reality. I don't know, unless one of you could think. I've never heard a stereotype where I said, I don't
He's already changed the goalpost. Now we're just talking about fucking stereotypes. Stereotypes are not inherently racist. It's how you use them.
even know where that comes from. That's just falling out of the sky. Usually stereotypes arise because, society has observed things about groups of people, and they can be negative, they can be positive, but I don't see them as inherently racist.
Now, we have a clip from the film that we want to roll here. Let's go ahead and play this. This is from the dinner scene. Matt, you've probably seen this 100 times by now, but
few times.
let's take a watch.
I used to be a white woman, an unsuccessful one, for many decades, and it was a miserable experience. And really, the hatred of yourselves and each other is like the not seeing your power, the being afraid. Like, all you do is talk shit about each other, talk shit about yourself. Oh my God, I'm so fat.
That's all they do. I'm telling you, these white women.
But that's it. It's I'm so fat, I'm so stupid, I'm blah blah blah.
Sorry.
Your kids are watching you, and they're watching you talking shit about each other, raging against the machine or being silent or whatever the hell it is that you're doing or not doing. and they know that you're not doing shit for them.
That's so important. That is so important what you just said. It's really important. That's
We
all.
may have to add you to our team.
Oh, I would love to take a seat and join you.
No, you're not allowed to.
How'd you get the cameras in there, by the way? Like, set that up for us?
Yeah, they're not hidden cameras.
Obviously, they're like cinematic level.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody knew they were being.
Everybody's mic'd up. And
Everybody's mic'd. Everybody knew they were being filmed, and they thought they were being filmed for a documentary about anti-racism, which they were, because that is what we made.
True.
So that's what we told people. We're making a documentary on anti-racism.
And did they know you were involved in it?
Probably not. Probably not.
So they're like this. So this waiter, like they didn't know that the waiter was part of the film.
No, they didn't. They didn't.
But they knew you had to be mic'd up because everybody in the kitchen and everywhere else had signed the thing. Is that how that worked? Or?
I don't think they knew that I had a mic on. And I wanted to sit at the table at the Race to Dinner and be a part of the conversation, but we were told that they only accept women to be at the table, which I thought was interesting, because then our next question is, well, what is a woman? Which kind of harkens back to our first film.
And you later do sit down in that scene.
Yeah, well, I kind of invited I earned
Right.
my seat at the table.
Right.
I invited myself to be a part of the dinner, and I felt
As a man does.
Painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
did a little mansplaining to the women, and they seemed to really enjoy it.
It's weird to me because they famously, I guess it's not so famous, but they back in, this was years ago, I think this was pre-COVID, there was a podcast called Femsplainers that Danielle from Crittenden From and Christina Hoff Sommers hosted, where they had a similar experience with Syra Rao over the Race to Dinner stuff. And you'd think they would be way more careful, but it seems as though maybe they let...
I'm interested to see more of what Ryan Grimm does here, because he's already pointing out how fake the whole thing fucking is.
their guard down? I don't know.
Yeah, that is, of course I get this question all the time. It's like, how did they not recognize me, or how did they not ask more questions? And I guess I don't know the answer to that question, but I do think that the answer I generally give that I think is correct is that a lot of these people live in kind of a bubble. So number one, they're not as aware of, people outside that bubble as we assume they are. So me, as someone in conservative media, I'm actually outside of their bubble, which is weird to me because I know everybody in liberal media. Because I want to know what they're saying. So I kind of assumed that they do the same.
You're familiar with Ryan Grimm, noted liberal journalist Ryan Grimm.
So he's right about 12% of the time, which I appreciate.
I'll take that.
So, but they're kind of in this interesting bubble that they don't, not only didn't know who I was, but also I think it was kind of inconceivable to them that they would ever find themselves in a room with someone who doesn't agree with them. I think that just never occurred to them because it's never happened before. Robin DiAngelo appears later in the film, and I think me sitting in the room with her was probably the first time in like 20 years that she's actually sat across the room from someone who doesn't already agree with everything that she thinks.
I think part of the 12% that I've been right about over the years, I think, has been that I do think this entire DEI industry is, a grift, and it's just milking corporations, and also that
You've written about that.
Yeah, and that it is actively harmful in the sense that when corporations, I actually do believe that corporations oftentimes internally do have racist structures set up within them, and also they all operate sometimes in racist ways, and when they get sued for that, and they're facing the consequences of that, one of the things that they do is they hire these DEI consultants.
Right.
And say, well, you can't come after us, actually. How could we possibly be racist? Like, we spent this money to bring these consultants
That's a very good point.
in, and the consultants then cover for their more systemic racism to be allowed to continue without being interrogated. What it does is it turns the interrogation inward, where you say, well, these structures and these corporations can't be challenged. What we really need to do is look inside and find our own racism. And because we're all born with it or whatever, it's just inculcated in us. None of us are then responsible for it. And so therefore, we're not responsible for actually changing anything on a system-wide basis. But I'm curious, as somebody who spent so much time within this grift of a system, what was your take on these folks? Like, do they believe what they're saying, or have they found like a consultancy that is
D'Angelo's good.
that they're able to make money on, and they're kind of now locked into it?
Yeah, it's well, the short answer is I don't know exactly if they believe what they say, but
I want to see where Ryan's going with this one.
but it strikes me that they probably don't believe.
Because I don't know if you noticed, he just perfectly pretty much described what Matt Walsh does.
Much of it, especially the parts of it that are so absurd on their face. But there's a lot of money in it, as we discovered making the film, and then of course there's a lot of power and influence, and also there's it must feel very, very good for them to be consulted as these kind of moral experts. And so that's what they get out of it. So it's actually not very complicated. That's why they're in this, because money, power, influence. Right? It's the tale as old as time. Now, on the other hand, you've got, so that's like the Robin DiAngelos of the world, selling the books, making millions of dollars. But then you've got the people that are actually buying the books and who are going to the race to dinner and going to these seminars that we kind of crashed for our film. They're a more interesting case because they're not getting any money out of it. They're spending money, and they're not getting power, influence out of it. So for them, I think part of it's like a virtue signal. They want to be able to tell their friends that, hey, I went to Race to Dinner and it was so life-changing. But then most of it for those people is that I think they actually do believe it. It is speaking to something. There's like something going on inside them. I don't know if it's just like a kind of guilt or something that they carry around. And a lot of them are secular. They don't have religion. And so this becomes kind of like a replacement for religion. I don't know if that's part of it. I think it's probably part of it.
Yeah, I feel like those people have kind of correctly identified that they were raised in a society that still does have racism as part of it.
And as I think any
it's
multicultural society always will.
Yeah,
To some extent.
it's their way of kind of trying to confront it. I think it's ill thought out, but I understand where they're coming from.
But what I would say yes, there's still racism in society. There always will be. As long as there are different races and cultures living together, you can have racism. I think we have a lot less of it than pretty much anywhere else on Earth. But whatever racism you find in society now is individual. It's not systemic. It's not in the system. These systems are not set up to disadvantage, quote unquote, people of color. In fact, the only real systemic racism you find anymore is the kind that's targeted at white people and also Asians. That's what affirmative action is. Like that, the only time you ever find a policy that specifically says, here's an advantage that you can't have if you're a race. The only time it ever says that is if it's singling out white and or Asian people. It doesn't go the other way anymore.
Well, so what about, and even people on the right now are saying Republicans have singled out Haitians, and this is an interesting segue because we were just talking about multiculturalism and how wherever you have different people from different backgrounds, races, ethnicities put together, there will always be some types of discrimination, and the goal of the
We'd like to see more. To my understanding, this was more of a debate between Ryan and Matt. Let's see where it goes. Ryan's made some very good points, but it's not talked a whole lot.
culture should be to minimize that. Has there been legitimate racism directed by high-profile?
I kind of wish Emily wasn't there. She is just there to cheerlead Matt Walsh.
Republican lawmakers, this is the accusation on the table, towards the Haitian community in the United States, and particularly in Springfield, Ohio, in the last couple of weeks?
No, absolutely not. I haven't heard it. Everything I've heard has been critical of the fact that we're importing, thousands of people from the third world who are coming into communities. And look, America, nobody thinks that it will benefit.
So in case you're wondering, what Matt Walsh just said there was pretty racist, but cool.
Benefit America to become more like Haiti. Nobody thinks that. Or I would challenge anyone, if they do think that, to explain how that's the case. Like, in what way could this country be improved by making it more like Haiti? When you look at Haiti, what part of Haiti are you saying to yourself, we need?
It's not about making America like Haiti. It's that these people are refugees and need a place to fucking live and make money. You piece of shit.
More of that.
Beaches.
Well, we have more beaches than them too, right? Don't we?
Right.
We're a much bigger country.
We don't want a marine invasion and occupation of the United States. that constantly decapitates governments and takes the money out of the country and saddles us with
We don't want the Clintons
debt
either.
from a revolution. Yeah,
Right. Although I don't. So you're saying that
we wouldn't want to be like basically a colony that the entire West spends 200 years punishing after the Haitian Revolution.
I get
Nice move.
that. I understand that, but also at a certain
We
point,
wouldn't want that. No, yes.
we wouldn't want that. But I would also say that
Fantastic. I love what he did there. It's like, hey, you know, the country that the West is that the United States and other Western countries have been penalizing. Yeah, that's what Haiti is. And now we're actually helping them. And you're like, fuck those people. They live in a third world country. Why is it third world, Matt? Why?
that's not entirely why Haiti's in the position that it's in. I mean, at a certain point, as a country, you have to stand on your own 2 feet and take care of yourself. And
but at what point is that? They elect Aristide, and we overthrow Aristide. Then they elect Jovenel Moïse. Jovenel Moïse is assassinated a bunch of people with American connections, and then we install in 2021, like the United States installed the prime minister that we just ousted. Like, so we could say, okay, yeah, you got to get over the 200 years ago, but like we're still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not in favor of. I'm very non-interventionist in my policies, so I'm not in favor of most of the things that we're doing in other countries.
We just made the new government in Haiti in a hotel room in Jamaica, and then we insisted that whatever government we made in Jamaica had to allow Kenyan troops to come in under the flag of the UN in order to go to war with the gangs.
Yeah, I'm not. Look, I'm not interested in.
Right.
If it were up to me, I'm not interested in doing anything in Haiti. Like let Haiti be Haiti and take care of them. That's sort of my whole point here. Let them take care of themselves and their own problems. I'm also not saying that there's like never a scenario where we would let someone from Haiti into the country. But it doesn't have to just be about Haiti. But when you're throwing open the gates and just inviting anyone, in particular, the third world.
I guess your assumption there was that it is Haitian people that are creating the conditions on Haiti, and that if the Haitian people come to Springfield, they will recreate the conditions
Well, but I don't
that
think
are
you can-
Haiti in Springfield. Whereas what I'm saying is that it's actually the U.S. that has
I don't think you can entirely put it on.
largely.
But it's still a country comprised of people, right?
But without its own autonomy as
Okay, but you can't. I don't think you can entirely put it on the United States. Like the Haitian people have nothing to do whatsoever with the state of their own country. Nothing. I mean, I think that's a bit absurd. I'm perfectly willing to, as I said, agree that a lot of the United States sort of adventurism and interventions in other countries has been unwise, and I'd prefer for us to focus on our own country, not try to build governments in other countries. But at the same time, I think that you can't completely absolve the people of any country of the problem, just like in this country. The problems that we have in our country, we can point to the government, we can point to immigration, we point to all those things. But ultimately, like, the people of the country have to be responsible for their own nation. And I say that of all nations.
Right, fair enough. So you said earlier that we have less racism here than lots of other countries, which I think is a fair point to make.
Glass half full.
And obviously you would acknowledge that at some point in our history we had lots of racism, right?
Sure.
Lots of racism then, less racism now. So when did we get to a point where it wasn't systemic and it was no longer a problem that we as a democratic society need to deal with? Like, what was the moment in your mind?
Well, I'm not sure that you could point to one exact moment in time when it goes from a systemic issue to not systemic anymore. But what we know for sure is that right now we are certainly in the moment where it's not systemic. Any time in history, I'll answer your question.
Yeah.
At any point in history, when you can go back and look at actual laws and policies that were in place that deprived Black Americans or any other group of rights, well, that was a time when you had systemic, and we know that existed historically. Yeah. So if you wanted to point to an exact moment, I mean, I guess the most obvious moment would be the Civil Rights Act. But of course, these are changes that happen gradually over time. Just like with slavery, you can't, even with slavery, you can't really People like to point to the Emancipation Proclamation as the moment when slavery was ended. Of course, we know that wasn't when it ended. So we know we don't have slavery anymore. But if you were to ask me, what's the exact moment when slavery stopped? Well, it wasn't an exact moment. It was a gradual ending of that horrific institution. But certainly now it doesn't exist anymore, in this country anyway. And I'd say the same thing with systemic racism as well, that nobody is creating policies, again, that are deliberately intended to create disadvantages for quote unquote people of color.
I have a question about that. A lot of conservatives will say there is one policy, and this is, you're about as anti-abortion and pro-life as it gets. A lot of conservatives will say a remaining institution.
I mean, you're right, Espen. But you're right. Like he's just saying stuff. He's not like, he doesn't have any facts. Like when Ryan was going at him, like he had like actual like facts, data points, and Matt has like nothing. It's just like, it just isn't a thing.
Systemic racism is abortion because it disproportionately, as conservatives make this argument, affects Black children and Black families. Is that an example of systemic racism or racism, period?
And I think it's a mistake when conservatives make that point, because I think conservatives are very desperate to be able to do the whole thing where they turn back on Democrats and say the Dems are the real racists.
Yes.
And I just think that's a lame move, and you're trying to use the left's own language against it, which I think it doesn't work because you're accepting sort of their premise. So what I'd say about abortion is, no, it's not systemically racist. It does disproportionately impact the Black community, no question about it. But does it exist for that? Really, is Planned Parenthood, is that why they exist right now? Because they want to kill?
Yeah, Wow's bringing up an excellent point, because the Haitian refugees in Springfield, they're dealing with lots of racism right now, thanks to fucking J.D. Vance and Donald Trump fuckers. But it's really unfortunate. And I am certain Haitian refugees in general are dealing with lots of racism right now. That should be absolutely acknowledged, because that is a real thing. That one of the people running for the leader of this fucking country pushed on those people. It's gross.
Black babies. No, Planned Parenthood exists because they want to kill babies, and they don't care what color the baby is. They just want the money that comes from it.
Yes, Planned Parenthood exists because they want to kill babies. Jesus Christ, Matt. Holy shit.
But it just so happens that ends up disproportionately impacting the Black community. And this goes to the disproportionate impact thing, which I'm glad you brought that up, because that's usually what's used to support the theory of systemic racism, as they say.
Just to make it absolutely clear, Planned Parenthood is designed to help mothers who maybe don't have the resources to get the best child care possible for their children. It's not about fucking killing babies. And it's always disgusting when they frame it that way.
Well, but these policies disproportionately impact certain groups. Okay, they might, but that doesn't mean that they're intended to do that. A disproportionate number of Black Americans end up in prison. Does that mean that that's why the prison is there, to put Black
neighborhoods are over-patrolled by police officers, and that's why you get more Black people in prison. They're also more likely to get more severe sentences.
Americans in it? No. The reason why a disproportionate number of Black Americans end up in prison is that, unfortunately, a disproportionate number of Black Americans commit violent crime.
Well, that's super racist right there. Thank you, Matt Walsh.
That's just what the stats show. And
But
I mean, there's so much we could dive into. Number one, they're over-patrolled. Number two, Black Americans have less resources. They have less advantages. It's a lot tougher for Black people to get jobs. The Black people struggle, like they have to work twice as hard to get half as far as white people. And step one in addressing that is acknowledging the actual fucking issues. But it was the Black unemployment rate. It's pretty bad, as I recall. All right, so here's ABC News. Black unemployment rate is consistently twice that of white workers. Since the U.S. first collected that data in 1972, Black employment rate has consistently stood at levels twice as high as unemployment rate among white people. Relationship has undergone occasional shifts up or down, but quickly returned to level 2 to 1. There's no other relationship in the labor market that's nearly this consistent. The ironclad disparity owes to continued discrimination in the job market, as well as persistent racial disparity and educational attainment and professional networks, among other factors, economists advocates told ABC News. Racial differences in the unemployment rate stem in large part from ongoing discrimination that influences choices made by companies about which workers to add or lay off, economists told ABC News. So yes, black people have less resources. They you know, and I'm willing to accept that maybe black people are more likely to do crime than white people, potentially, although I think that's fuzzy. It's tough to judge because they're over patrolled as well. That being said, they have a lot less fucking opportunity. Maybe, I don't know, address the fucking issues instead of attacking the fucking symptom. I don't know. Like, it's one of those things, it drives me nuts. So, like, let's just go ahead and give them, okay, black people commit more crime. I'll just go ahead and give it to them. Now, is that because they have less opportunity, or because they're just genetically inferior? Because those are your two fucking options. I personally refuse to believe the genetically inferior part, which means it's the systematic stuff, which means maybe we should fucking address that and fucking fix it. Just saying.
So there's an argument that a system is what it does, and that claiming otherwise is just kind of hocus pocus, just magic. Like if a system produces a certain result, but you as an observer of that system say, well, actually, that's not what the system is supposed to do. Those words are just meaningless.
What about
and
a
that
system?
The system just chews them up and spits them out and produces and continues to produce the result that it produces. Like, for instance, during Jim Crow, pre-Civil Rights Act, you've got laws on the books that are systemically racist, that allow for straight up racist results. When it comes
design
to
of the system was explicitly racist.
Design of the system is aimed at producing segregated schools and low-income households.
Okay, I hate doing bi-language stuff, but Matt, you can tell Matt Walsh is getting tense.
I mean, low-income neighborhoods that are predominantly or almost exclusively populated by Black Americans, right? Mm-hmm. You then pass laws that reform those laws, that make it so that you can't legally do those things anymore. Yet the power structure broadly remains in place, and the results stay the same. You still have, broadly speaking, massive low-income areas, predominantly populated by Black families, and you continue to have segregated schools. And so a person who was born into this country today, if they're Black, they're more likely to grow up in one of those neighborhoods. They're more likely to go to terrible schools rather than good schools. They're more likely to end up in prison or in part of the system. And so you would step back and say, well, the system is still doing what it is. The system never stopped doing it. There was never a day from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday that all of a sudden the system stopped working in the same racist way, which we acknowledge was racist when it was written into the law.
Although the system
but
produces...
now we pretend it's not because we struck through that one line.
Yeah, but if we agree that you say the system is what it does, I'd probably disagree with you on that. I mean, what the system is intended to do is what it certainly matters here.
No, what the system does, the actual results matter, Matt.
Everyone has their reasons. That's what's so frightening. People can find a way to justify any action, no matter how evil. You can't judge people by what they think or say, only by what they do.
Why?
But also,
why would it matter what we intend a system to do? Like
because that's what we're talking about.
The system produces a robust Nigerian middle class, like people who come here from Nigeria. Tom Sowell makes this point. It's a point that's popular.
So then that's a defense of the system.
Yeah, Tom Sowell is a piece of shit too.
That's what I'm saying.
Because that's what it does.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So does that go both ways?
No, because the intent of this, my point is that the intent, whatever you intend a system to do is meaningless. Like if you intend for a house to have a roof and a second floor that is sturdy, but when you walk into the second floor, you fall through it.
But that
and
doesn't
the roof
reflect
collapses on you.
But that doesn't reflect on your anti-roof sentiments.
Yeah, and also
it doesn't matter.
And
Like,
also,
built-
if you
built a
okay, but
crappy
to use
house.
your analogy, if you walk into a house and there's a problem in the house, you can't automatically assume that it's the fault of whoever built the house. It could be, depending on the problem. But you also have to look at who's living in the house, who's supposed to be maintaining the house. And if you're living in a house and you're not taking care of it, and in fact you're mistreating the house and it goes to hell, and then you turn around and blame whoever built the house 100 years ago, well, I'm going to say, like, well, this is at some point you got to take responsibility for your own house. And so that's my point with the black community as it stands right now in America. Yes, as we've already established, there was actual systemic racism against the black community for a long time. It's a terrible, evil thing. Everybody agrees on that point. I don't think anyone disagrees. That is over now. There is no longer a system in place that is designed to deprive black Americans of rights. I mean, would you agree with that at least?
No, I do think it's still designed that way, but it's designed in a way where it can't be litigated because it's not in the law.
Okay, but so can you point to me an exact point of the system, an exact place in the system, a policy that is designed to deprive black Americans of rights?
The same people that designed the system to protect the wealth of the upper class, in the 40, throughout American history, like continued to be in control.
Yeah, but now you're talking about class, not race. I'm talking about race.
Right, but how do you disrupt class if you're so segregated by? I mean, how do you disrupt race if you're so segregated by class?
Well, but I don't think you can bring class into this because I would agree that we could talk about class. I'll agree that there are elites who care about themselves and don't care about the lower class. I would say that those people are just as unconcerned with a white person in a trailer park in Appalachia as they are unconcerned with a black person in the inner city. So it is class. We could talk about that. But my question was, because we talk about the system, it's a broad concept here. So let's narrow it down. Let's find a piece of the system that we can point to and say, well, this is designed to hurt black people.
Okay, so if you go to Georgia, for instance, after they implemented school desegregation, what they started doing is saying, oh, okay, well, we can't legally keep black people out of our neighborhoods or out of our schools, but what we can do is we can secede from our neighborhoods. I mean, you've been to the Atlanta suburbs?
A little bit.
Like every four...
Unfortunately.
Like every four...
Try to stay away.
Yeah.
Like every 4 blocks for a long time, you had like new school districts, and they would be drawn. They would be just basically gerrymandered. Like they would know where the white people were, and they would gerrymander the school district so that only white people would be at part of this.
Yeah, but you're going back to desegregation.
No. This is what they're doing now. Like this is up to today. Like, so what they're doing is they're saying, okay, these are the new laws in place. However, we like our system of segregation and racism that we have here. So how do we hire the best lawyers?
Is that about class?
To show that, but it's also about race.
Well, but I'm saying, do you think primarily in the minds of the designers of the system, are they actually discriminating intentionally on a class basis,
or
is it
pretty race driven?
I don't think that there's any evidence that it's race driven. I think in like an example you give, it's class, it's people wanting to avoid crime-ridden, impoverished areas. Maybe someone doesn't want to send their kids to school in a place that's high crime. There's going to be a lot of delinquency and everything in the school system. I don't think it's because the kids are black. It's just because of that. And also, the other thing is when we talk about.
But at what point
when we talk about school districts or the way communities are set up, here's another point that rarely comes up. It's pretty simple. You can move, right? So you can always move.
Not if you don't have money, Matt.
I mean, if you live in a community where you're claiming it's been set up systemically to disadvantage it, I don't buy that. But if I did, I would say, well, you should probably move from that community. I mean, you can go somewhere else. There's no law saying you can't. And if there was a law saying...
Some HOA situations will try to block.
Yeah, but they're not going to say you can't move here if you're black.
It's also why a lot of black community groups support voucher systems to allow, like work with conservatives on voucher systems to allow kids to get to different schools.
So when you see stats that say like a black homeowner who's trying to get a mortgage, who has a higher credit score and higher income, gets a higher interest rate from the average bank than a white applicant. A bunch of these studies have been done where they'll put in like a black sounding name and higher credit scores, higher income, better candidates on paper other than their name. And they get overall, there have been so many studies that have replicated this. They get a higher interest rate, which means their cost of borrowing is higher, means the mortgage is higher, which means you have to have that much more money to move into the neighborhood that you're talking about. So systemically, it doesn't say, well, if you're black, you can't live here, but systemically what it does is it makes it easier for white people to move into these wealthier neighborhoods, harder for black people to move into those neighborhoods. And that's before you even get to the wealth effect. Jim Crow, only ended recently, which means that if you look at the kind of savings rates and the inheritance rates for the average black family, it's close to nil, especially after the subprime mortgage wipeout of 2008, compared to white families, which...
You see, Matt Walsh is currently coming across somebody who knows his shit and is dismantling him right here, which is kind of awesome. Like, I want to know all these details and facts, but Ryan Grimm's on top of it.
Can go to mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and say, can you help put my kids in private school? Can you pay the down payment? 20% is an awful lot for this mortgage.
Generational wealth.
Yeah.
Right.
So you combine the fact that they have to pay higher interest rates with the fact that there's lack of generational wealth. That to me is systemic, but I'm curious specifically on the interest rate question. What's going on there, and should that be a problem that we as a democratic society should address? Like, why are black loan applicants paying higher mortgage interest rates across the board? And again, that is replicated across the economy.
Okay, I'd have to look at the studies you're talking about. You say that they've been replicated time and time again. There's no issues with the studies, and there's no issues methodology.
I'm sure people could pick some of the studies apart, but it's pretty well accepted.
Yeah, I'd have to know who is accepted by exactly, but...
Yes, Lucifer.
So for the sake of argument, let's say that those studies are totally legit. I would still go back to a class issue on that. And the reason is that, look, banks...
But the white...
Well, can we explain? Okay. Like, banks care about the money. That's all they care about. They don't care about... I mean, these banks are not being run by people who are saying, we got to keep black...
Well, then why are they rejecting black-sounding names, Matt? On paper, they should be fine with it, but they are. Isn't that interesting?
People poor. I don't care about that. I don't think they care about anybody. They care about the money. And so if that's happening, they're making stereotypical assumptions, class-based assumptions that I believe they would probably also make if somehow they got they had the impression that this was, say, a white, quote unquote, white trash, as they're often called, from the trailer park. If I think the banks would have the same sort of skeptical, discriminatory attitude in that case as they would to someone who they're assuming is from the inner city, let's say.
Right, but so the other word for that would be implicit bias. So let's say the banks...
We have to wrap, by the way. We have a hard note.
Oh, but let's say we got to wrap in a second. But let's say the banks only do care about money. That's a reasonable thing to say. So then what could explain why they would treat the two differently? It would have to be, like you're saying, but what you're saying is there might be some implicit bias toward, if they could identify some poor white guy, which goes to the point, though, of how it's easier for poor whites, which I used to be one of, but it was easier for me to migrate out. My name is Ryan Grimm.
I don't even think
you can't even tell that I was white trash.
Right.
I mean, you can if you know me pretty well, but... But you can't tell on a resume or an application.
You see his arrest record.
Yes.
I don't know. You're wearing a tie and everything. I wouldn't say. I mean,
there you go.
You could have fooled me.
Yeah.
Look, but I wouldn't even call it implicit bias. I think it's just like banks, they are biased against people they don't think will pay their mortgage, basically.
Right. And so why don't they think a person with a black name will pay their mortgage?
Because I think in that case...
Despite a high credit score and a high income.
If that is true, then they're making assumptions about They're making class-based assumptions. This is a lower-income person coming from a low-income neighborhood, even if their current income is, the same as. That's the background, and so
sounds like those people face a systemic problem.
Yeah.
Well, class-based, but that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we're getting told.
We're getting it in the ear. Matt, thank you so much. This is a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed the movie. Ryan, what'd you think?
It's funny. I'll acknowledge this. The movie's funny. These guys are clowns.
You put that on the poster.
Yeah. These guys are total. These guys are total clowns.
Matt Walsh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Hey, if you liked that video.
All right, so that was Ryan Grimm doing a really good job showing off how racist Matt Walsh is. So yeah, overall, I was happy with that. It took a while. I felt like Ryan was getting sidelined a lot, but when he finally stepped in, he finally did a really good job going after it. As you can probably tell, I'm gonna sign out. I'm thinking I want to do a Matt Walsh video, but this turned out to be really long, so I'm thinking maybe I'll do like a series. Maybe I'll do like 3 or 4 videos. Maybe just call him Matt Walsh is a racist to line up with his movie. It's the tie-in everybody wanted. The tie-in that actually shows what a piece of shit he is, that's for sure. Guys, like, subscribe. There's a whole bunch of channels in the description box. Check those out as well. Party on and be excellent to each other.
Books, records, films, these things matter. Call me shallow. It's the fucking truth.
Yes, I'm going to make the case that for a white settler in the 1800s or a pilgrim in the 1600s, or an explorer, conquistador in the 1500s, for them to have racist attitudes was not those racist attitudes were not as bad as the racist attitudes that you might find today. For most of us, being racist was never even really like an option. We grew up in a world where, for a lot of us anyway, we grew up in an environment where it just never even came up. It never even occurred to most. It never even occurred to me. Perhaps they engaged in practices that are to us horrifying and incomprehensible and brutal and savage, which, some of the pioneers and settlers and conquerors, they would have seen, that's how they would have seen human sacrifices and scalping and cannibalism. But if we were to encounter that with this with this hypothetical alien race, who, they look a lot like us, but they're also profoundly different in how they look. They're very different in how they act, how they speak, their customs and everything. If that were to happen for us, there would be a very real debate among us about whether or not these creatures are equal to us. That would not be a given under any circumstance. I'm talking about looking at our ancestors in context, in perspective, and accepting that there were great men and women in the past, even if they had flaws, even if they were racist, there were still great men and women, and we could learn quite a bit from them. We could learn positive lessons from them if we would look at them and stop turning them into cartoons and saying, oh, they were just all racist, so they were terrible, and that's all they were. Not understanding that by that logic, we have just dismissed everybody in history. Not just them, but everybody. If on that basis we can dismiss an entire person from the past, then we're dismissing basically everybody.